Hello there, you're listening to The Power Movement.
Welcome to The Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week we have a business episode with one of the partners of C3, Johan Malkoski. Johan is not only an owner of Capita Union, he is also a legendary business figure in the world of snowboarding. Once known for having a lot of Masshole to him when he was building brands and making shit happen behind the scenes for those iconic brands, Johan's changed over the past 5 years. He's gotten a little softer, a little nicer, and a lot more compassionate. That's what cancer will do to a person. And while it's not the ideal hand of cards that Johan was dealt, a positive attitude and a lot of support can go a long way, and Johan is still here. Before we talk about snowboarding, business, kids, cancer, and a lot more, I want you to do a few things for me. First, I want to ask you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. Second, I want you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. And third, if you have any questions or concerns for me, I now have email. You can reach me at mike@thepowellmovement.com and I will get back to you. Finally, I need to thank my amazing sponsors who really make this show happen. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, the Summit at Snoqualmie, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's go to Johan Malkoski. Here in West Seattle, because I don't like to leave West Seattle, you don't like to be in your office, so we were able to do this at my house. I'm here with Johan Malkoski. Do I say your last name right? I feel like I always murder it.
No, that's proper. There's no W in it, which most people like to put in there, but my middle name is your last name, so it's Powell.
No way. Is that a family name?
It is, yeah. Named after my aunt and uncle that gave my parents a house for them to live in after their one and only was born.
So this is like a dual Powell movement here. 2 number 2s going at once. You were born John Malkoski, but how the hell do you get the name Johan? Because I've never heard you called John until I did a little research on you.
Get into that one down the road. Let me get this voice going. Actually, can we just warm up a little bit?
Yeah, we're warming up right now. Getting comfortable with the microphone. You don't sit in front of a microphone all day long. You just talk at people and you're not being recorded.
I talk in front of my computer through either FaceTime or Skype. I refuse to take phone calls.
I've called you before and you've picked up once or twice, but when people call you, they call you Johan, and that is not your born name. You are John Powell Malkoski, which is an amazing middle name, but how do you get the name Johan? That is what everyone refers to you as.
I moved out to Steamboat, Colorado in 1989, and upon arriving, there was a dude from Boston College that just got done playing pro hockey in Sweden. He was living there. He had gotten his teeth knocked out and needed a place to escape. His name was Chris Delaney, a.k.a. the Doctor. And I came down for my first day on the hill in Colorado. And I was standing there with my O'Neill pullover fluorescent coat and my Sims Terry Kidwell, and he looks at me and he just says, Johan the Boarder. And it kind of stuck. I started getting checks that year in Steamboat with my name Johan, and pretty much everyone calls me that except for my parents and the wife when she's mad at me.
When you get checks with the name Johan on it, do you change your name to Johan? Is it a nickname that you
It's a nickname. It's John with an A added, so my passport's not that. I haven't gone that far.
Okay. Doing research on you, there's not a whole bunch out there on sales guys. So tough to get a ton of information on you, but knowing that you're a Masshole, Where were you born and raised?
South Shore. So South Dartmouth, Mass., which is 2 towns away from Rhode Island. On the coast, and then raised there until I went to college at Salem State, which was on the North Shore. And that's where I came up and met my roommates that really fostered the love of being on the hill all the time. So I had a roommate in college named Sparky that had a house up at Tenny Mountain. Real Irish, big family, allowed me to come every weekend. And Polish John got to stay up at Tenny Mountain every weekend and ski and snowboard.
You're Polish?
I was half Polish and half Irish, and now with that little transformation I went through 4 years ago, I'm now 100% German.
Oh, yeah, that is right, and we are going to talk about that. What is your best Polish joke? Because back 20 years ago, you could tell them, you probably heard every single one of them.
I don't know. I just said that I was a perfect combination of being drunk and dumb.
Okay, well.
I don't have really Polish jokes.
That's I have plenty of them. I'm not going to share them because they're not right.
You did share them quite a bit. Those and the Jewish jokes on the start line. during sleigh ride.
I have a lot of those that I only share with people that I know can handle them because in this world, you can't really say too many of my jokes. But you grew up in Dartmouth or...
South Dartmouth. North Dartmouth had the mall. South Dartmouth had the beaches.
And is that just like a rich place that people go to New York City? Or is it a working class place? When I hear Dartmouth, I think of money.
You're thinking of Dartmouth Skiway and Dartmouth College, two completely different things. Dartmouth's a really working class town. Blue collar, right next to New Bedford, which was the whaling capital and was the richest city in the world at one time, but now it's just full of heroin and Portuguese fishermen. But Dartmouth is working white suburbia town that is built of neighborhoods of a lot of Portuguese. I was the only non-Portuguese person in my neighborhood.
Whoa.
So we were the only ones without a garden and a shed in a backyard.
What kind of things are you getting into? Because you're a little bit older than me. What are you, about 55, 54?
I turned 53 today.
Happy birthday. It's your birthday today?
Yeah.
Oh, man. And you came here. That's amazing. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you're 53 today. And back in like your high school days, just to see what kind of person you are, what kind of music were you into? What kind of things were you into? Did skateboards have urethane yet?
Yeah. In middle school, I used to skateboard to school on my Fiberflex with tracker mids and road riders. But I was into BMX. I was a BMX racer and also did some freestyle and that stuff. And I raced bikes from age 13 into my 40s. And so that's how I got into snowboarding. By the magazine's Action Now, you would see that snowboarding was starting to emerge. There was flight snowboards out of Rhode Island. It was winter stick. There was some Burton stuff. And I remember going down to this shop in Rhode Island, Redney's on the beach. They had flight snowboards and they had winter stick. And it was something I wanted to take to the winter because racing inside kind of sucked on a bicycle.
Did you play any other sports? Because you have two kids now. They're super into snowboarding, but I feel like there's also part jock to them where they're football players as well. They might not have that mentality, but they're really good at team sports. Did you have a team sport thing as well?
Yeah, I played basketball. Played basketball all the way up till high school, and then BMX took over.
Were you good at BMX?
Yeah.
Winning races?
Yeah. I raced nationals for 3 years, so I traveled chasing national plates. So I did that for a few years.
You're working as a bike tech as well in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
For Yesteryear Cyclery.
How long did you do that?
Did that through high school, and that guy in that shop really supported me and built a good foundation. He's one of the few mentors through life that I look at where I am today, if I am anywhere, and I attribute it to having really great and tolerant bosses. And Kim Camara, that's a dude's name. He's the first person I see when I drive into Dartmouth, Mass. To go see my parents. He'll be the first stop every time just to say hi and high five.
Through high school, were you a good kid? Did you do well in school and not get in trouble?
Having two teenagers now, I talk to my parents and tell them they got off easy. I didn't drink. I didn't party until senior in high school. I remember it was New Year's Eve. I went out and bought a 6-pack of Bud bottles, or someone bought me a 6-pack of Bud bottles. I drank 5 of them and chucked the 6 in the woods and called that good. I was pretty connected to bicycle racing, and I didn't want to jeopardize anything with that. I didn't have a car. I rode my bike because that was training and that was putting your miles on the bike and keep your legs spinning.
Did you get free bikes? Were you sponsored by your shop and some other people?
In the younger years, I paid for my bike, so I've got the pro deal. And then when I got out of college and I started racing again for another bike shop and another key mentor down the Cape, Bikes and More, I started getting bikes.
Okay. When you go to college, you end up at Salem State studying geography. What do you plan on doing with that? Do you just like traveling and you're like, fuck it, I'll learn about the world?
No, I went in actually as a computer science major. I soon realized that every 4-credit class required 20 hours of lab time, and I had no idea. I mean, I went to Salem State because I had a sailboat on the cover of the college, and across the street from my grandparents, there was a kid that was already at Salem State, so I got to go up there and visit. Never even saw the campus. He took me to a bar at 17 years old. I got hammered for the first time. I remember coming home, my parents were like, how was that school? I was like, oh, it's killer. I got into a bar. I got a hangover right now. Never had a hangover. I think it'd probably be a good place for me. And I ended up there. But I struggled through my first year of computer science. And then a guidance counselor said, you'd be pretty good in a geography major with a concentration in travel tourism management. And I just went with it.
Sounds like a good job as a cruise director or something like that.
Supposed to be corporate travel. Was supposed to work in Boston managing corporate travel policies. Okay. Which I manage my own these days.
Right. So you did use what you learned in school
sort of
today.
Yeah.
And that's when you started getting into snowboarding?
In college, yeah. I started skiing junior, senior year of high school doing ski trips. My mom made a deal with me that if I kept a B average in school, I could take a Wednesday ski trip every week with the local ski shop and go up to Stratton, Loon, Gunstock, one of those places, wherever the bus was going. So I pretty much skied my entire senior year, at least once a week from the South Shore, Massachusetts. And
then you're seeing snowboarding in your bike magazines. You're probably seeing it here or there on the mountains.
Wasn't seeing it on the mountains. You didn't see it on the hills. This was 1983, 1984, so you didn't really see it.
Okay.
But I was seeing it in the magazines. And then in college, my roommate and I, we drove up to Manchester Center, Vermont, and bought our Burton boards.
Did you go to the Burton factory?
We did. So Sparky's chick at the time was an East Boston mafioso's daughter. And she had an unregistered, uninsured Cadillac that we took from her. And we drove it to Vermont. And we each had, I think, $150 to buy these boards. The Elite 150s were $150, and the Elite 140s were $130. And we bought those so we could buy some beer for the drive back from Vermont down to Selm State.
Isn't that amazing that size difference changed the price of a product back then?
Yeah, it did. And that was a pretty cool experience driving up there through the fall. It was around this time that we went up there and got the stuff.
It was a pilgrimage for a lot of East Coast people to go to that Burton factory, because I've talked to people who came up when you came up, and it was called Burton boarding or Burtoning at some points. And given it's not anymore, but back then it was so new and there weren't that many brands out there. And it had to be maybe not a special experience because you're so new to it that you're just going to get a snowboard.
No, there was a lot of anticipation and build up to it. Saved our money for it. We went up there and it was pretty awesome. We were stoked. We were pretty stoked on ourselves. I remember coming back to the dorm room and bouncing around on the beds, pretending we were snowboarding. We were just two kooks doing that.
Where were you able to take your snowboards and use them? Was it a golf course?
First place was Salem Golf Course. We were ripping down the hill there. And then the first time we went was to Loon Mountain and went right to the top and the bindings blew right out of the board. So that went back into the closet for the season until we warrantied it. So I skied the rest of the season, and then they warrantied it and got a new one, and next year picked up on it and off we went.
And how long did it take you to actually, because those early products were
horrible.
Yeah. Not what snowboards are today. And carving a turn, it's hard to flex a 2x4. How was riding those boards? What was the experience like for you?
It was disappointing, to say the least. I remember I had LL Bean lace boots with no liners that were in these bindings that were just destroying your feet. They had these side fins that just gripped into the ice and you pretty much went straight. Surprisingly stuck with it, but once you linked that first turn, you kind of felt it, kind of like that Simon Dumont thing where he's getting all stoked on volleyball. Like you could feel the progression happening, and especially on the ice that you get one turn to two, like you just start counting down to get your turns down the hill. You know, at first we're skiing half in the morning and then snowboarding in the afternoon. And then by the time I got rid of that Burton board and got a Sims, that's when the game changed.
How often are you able to go ride while you're in school?
At least every weekend. College days, probably getting 20 plus days a year, which was decent.
Yeah, for a college kid, I mean, you've got to party and do a lot of other things too.
Sure.
When you graduate from school, do you do it in 4 years?
No, I was on academic probation for 6 semesters, and then I graduated in 5 years.
Well, that's pretty standard these days. Back then, maybe not as standard, but 5 years isn't so bad by any means. You do what a lot of New England kids do when you graduate college. You go to the big city and you get a job in Boston or an internship in Boston.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Corporate travel. And that's where I said, this isn't going to be for me. I saw those dudes just kind of working for the weekend. They'd get hammered Thursday, Friday, and Saturday and recover on Sunday. And it just looked miserable. They were caged in a box, and the commute in, the commute out, it just sucked. And I knew there was something different. And there was friends of mine that were moving down Cape Cod that summer. And I had taken an internship in Boston, but actually it was a job. I wrote my resume like I had graduated, because an internship you didn't get paid for. You worked 4 days a week and didn't get paid. You got college credits. The job I took, I worked 5 days a week and got paid for and got my college credits. So I did that for 6 months, and then all of a sudden I made up a story that my grandfather was sick, and I moved down to Cape Cod. And that's where I met 2 dudes that had just gotten back from Steamboat, Colorado. And that was the game changer right there.
So that next fall, is that when you pack it up and you're like, hey, I'm out of here?
Yeah, one of the dudes, they were just running their mouths about how good the powder was. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to get done with being an alcoholic down here on the Cape this summer, and then I'm going to have to get a job, or I can keep this dream going on and move out to Colorado with this dude. And we sent some money out to a bump skier from Lake Placid, New York, that had a place in Colorado. The hockey player was living there as well. And then we drove out there in November.
And I would think most parents really want their kid to use their education when they graduate school. You end up going to Boston, get a job, and everything looks to be on the right path. Then you throw the folks for a loop and you tell them that you're heading, I don't know if it's folks or it's mom or dad, but you're heading to Colorado and you're giving it all up in the search of snow. And what do they have to say to that?
They're super supportive, actually. They didn't really have a lot of reservations about what was going to happen or how life's plan was going to go set through their eyes. They gave me a toolbox and said, go build your own house, basically. Unlike parents of today, like myself, you have the set plan for your kids, and when it doesn't work out, it just leads to nothing but disappointment. But you're in charge of your own toolbox. So I was in charge of that and went out there and they gave me a high five and off I went.
Do you go out there with pretty much nothing, just a couple $100 in the bank?
I had a Nissan Sentra. I had a BMX bike on the top of the rack, my snowboards. Maury was on the other side, and we drove. And when we hit Kremlin, Colorado, I remember pulling over there and getting a 6-pack of Coors because it was pasteurized back then, and we couldn't get it back east. And so I made him drive from Kremlin to Steamboat, which was typically 50 minutes, but we were stuck in a snowstorm. It took 3 hours, and I celebrated my arrival to Colorado with that.
Nice. What are your first few gigs there?
I volunteered setting up a World Cup women's course right when I got there. And then I worked at a bar with a shot wheel called the Inferno. And then I started working at the Sports Stalker, which was the big ski place in town that had a rental area upstairs. And that's where the whole snowboarding thing started. We were rental techs, fitting whale bales on ladies. And you did that?
Yeah, I know exactly. I worked at Christie's. Same thing.
Sports Stalker was Christie's, or became Christie's. So fitting the whale bales on and doing our splits and all of that. But we had a snowboard section there, and that's where we started that stuff.
What was the scene like in Steamboat? Was there a lot of people snowboarding at that point? Because we're at, 80?
89. I went to college in 84 and got out in 89 and then off to Steamboat. The scene, it was the mogul capital of the world. There was a lot of bump skiers there.
Okay.
So there was a pack of us that snowboarded and skied together. We worked together. We played together. We were walking around the rental shop with coffee cups, and they weren't filled with coffee at 6 p.m., setting up people's din settings.
Well, that's the lifestyle of the mountain town employee, and God bless them because it's a fun lifestyle. How do you end up getting the gig as Colorado Powder Tools shop manager and buyer?
Well, at Sports Stalker, there was a rental area, and then a buddy of mine, Jason Kraut, and we figured there was an opportunity to start a snowboard shop there because they did snowboard rentals. And there was 2 snowboard shops in town. One was kind of corny, and the other one was a bunch of cool guys. There was no snowboard shop that people could go in and not get attitude, just get service, get taken care of, get put on the product they needed. That was the attitude that was fostered at Sports Stalker, where we were a customer first place. And Jason and I decided that if we invested our own money, we went out and bought some tools and that stuff and started a little repair shop within the snowboard shop. Then that next year went to the bosses, Keith Leifer and Bob Dapper, and said, hey, man, I think we can start a snowboard shop here. I think there's an opportunity here. Let us do this for you. They said, what's the idea? And we wanted to do kind of a diner operation, like a place that moms could come in and feel comfortable. The kids could also, there was the videos playing. There was all the shit. It wasn't grungy with corrugated steel and that, because that was kind of in at the time. We wanted a bright environment. And then they gave us the opportunity to build a store. It was Sports Stalker, and we called it Stalker Snowboards, and that then turned it into Powder Tools. And we're a standalone store in Gondola Square in Steamboat.
So you were always a go-getter. Like when you got to Steamboat, the first thing you did was volunteer for something because it was probably a cool thing to volunteer for.
No, it was opportunity. I volunteered because I got a ski pass to get on the hill that day and kind of stumbled into this. I wouldn't say go-getter. I saw an opportunity there to do something because I was going to have to work one way or another. And I didn't really enjoy putting skis on fat people. And I'd rather work in snowboards and work with what we were doing. So we saw an opportunity to parlay that into something that we're going to enjoy doing every day. So that's not a go-getter, more of an opportunist.
Yeah, an opportunist. And then does that put you in a position to be running the show with the snowboard shop there?
Yeah, we merged with Christie Sports, and they had a ski snowboard buyer that was pretty good on Excel sheets and that stuff. And I was more of the guy that woke up wherever I did at a trade show, put my shirt on inside out and went at it the next day. And we comboed up to be a buying team because we had opened more stores. We had opened one in Winter Park and one in Snowbird, and then started putting stores within the Christie sports suckers. By the time I left, there was 16 or so stores.
So you're important at this point.
Yeah, I was a buyer and a shop manager. So I ran Steamboat and also bought for the other stores. Yeah.
And you're pretty young at this point too.
I was in my 20s, yeah. Early 20s.
Now it is time for me to take a sponsor break, and my first sponsor is Evo. And they have supported me since day one, and I've shopped there since the day they opened their doors. The reason is they have all the great brands, the most knowledgeable and approachable staff, and they know what they're doing when it comes to boot fits, ski and snowboard tunes. They're really good at service. And when I don't feel like leaving the house, I get my stuff through evo.com. They have the same deals, but with free shipping on orders over $50, a no-hassle return policy, and a low price guarantee. And for listening to the show, I've got a new deal from Evo for you on all Evo branded products. They make some amazing stuff. I've been using their ski poles that are just as good as my $100 poles, but I paid a fraction of the price for them, and their offering is a whole lot more than just ski poles. When you head over to evo.com and check out, enter the code POWEL20, that's all one word and the number 20, no spaces, and you'll get 20% off of all Evo branded products. And when you do it, because Evo is made of good and inclusive people, they're going to give an additional 2% of all branded sales to local youth organizations. They're helping you have fun and making a difference in the community. Next up, it's Stanley. They are the brand that invented the keep things hot and cold category back in 1913, and they are located down the street from my house in Seattle. You remember Stanley from that green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long. They still do that, and so much more. When I think about Stanley, it's all about water bottles and pint glasses. The water bottle is a simple classic Stanley style that keeps my water cold for a couple more hours than whatever you put your water in. The pint glass keeps my beer ice cold way longer than I need it to, and the beveled edge makes me hydrate faster for some reason. It just feels good, and you're going to want to feel good too. To do that, head on over to stanley-pmi.com, go shopping, and you will get 30% off your entire order when you use the code TPM30. That's all one word, the number 30. When you check out, you'll get that 30% off. Everything you buy helps support the show, so please do that. Now we're going to jump back into the podcast. Most people go to those places and they do that rental thing for 3 years. It becomes Groundhog Day, and they either graduate to another mountain or they go into the real world. For you, did it ever start getting to be Groundhog Day where you're in the same mountain, you know every nook and cranny on it, you know every person that's going to come in the shop?
I moved to Colorado and thought it was going to be for a year, and then realized how fun it was. And I said, I'm going to stay till I'm 25. And then 25 was coming up. I said, I'll stay till 27. And then I was like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm going to get a real job by 30. And I stayed till right before my 30th birthday. It was when I was out of there.
And you eventually do get a real job, and a real job within snowboarding. You end up going over to Wave Rave. You're the sales manager. Given, I don't think you have any experience being a sales manager, and you have a buddy who's lobbying for you. He's already at Wave Rave, and he's like, hey, this Johan guy's going to be badass. We got to bring him in. They don't know you. They're like, yeah, we're going to bring him in because you said so. Is that how you get your position pretty much?
Pretty much gotten every job on a referral and someone lying for me. I had zero qualifications to be there. And I remember talking to the head guy at Sports Soccer, Keith Leifer, who was one of the owners and vice president. And I said, Keith, I'm going to get this job. I have no idea what to do. And he basically said, you're going to do exactly what you're doing at the shop. You're going to manage people, you're going to manage emotions, and you're going to keep things in line. And it's real similar to what you're doing. You're going to ask a lot of questions, and you're going to figure it out from there. And kind of gave me the little go get 'em boy to go do that. And I went over to Wave Rave and worked with a good group of people there. It was one of the only 2 snowboard clothing brands with Gore-Tex. So we kind of had something unique, and it was the first snowboard clothing brand in the business. So there was some history to it. And it was something that I had worn and believed in.
Were they the cool company within snowboarding outerwear at that point when you got
At that point, no. They were, and then they had kind of faltered. They had rested on their laurels for a little bit, and some of the people in there might have aged out a little bit. They got tired with it. So it was our job to come back in and throw a little life in it. And I think we did. I think we had a really good team. We had a good rep group that started building that back up again.
I looked at your LinkedIn page. It says that in the 13 months when you were at Wave Rave, you restructured sales and marketing and you increased sales by 75%. and you didn't know what the fuck you were doing when you first got in there. So how are you able to make those increases? What are the moves you make when you get in there and you don't know what you're doing?
Communication, a lot with bringing the rep group together and also bringing the retailers in. And back then, it wasn't the internet or social media or anything that could do that. We built a magazine that we'd send out monthly, kind of bringing people into the Wave Rave world, what was going on there, what made us special. So we would hand make the 500 to 800 magazines, staple them, write them, print them, get them out, ship them every month. We called it skid mark, toilet paper. And we did that for probably at least a year while I was there. So brought that in there. We kind of got our buying programs in line. That was one of the things that I did bring to that was a buyer's perspective of how line flow goes and how buying programs should go. And we roped that in. And I had some relationships with some key shops that were players in that time. And we leveraged those relationships.
Now you're on the white collar side of snowboarding. You know, when you're in the front lines, you're on the blue collar side, when you're putting people in boots and whale bales and all that stuff. But now you're on the business end of it. You're behind the scenes. And I would think that you get to snowboard in places in the name of sales that you would never even dream that you'd be able to go to. Were there any great trips with Wave Rave that were those first trips where you're like, holy shit, this job is going to take me across the world?
Well, when I got the job from the snowboard shop, the last year I was in Steamboat, I snowboarded 149 days.
Whoa.
And I remember the Burton rep, his name was John Yusko, him and the Nitro rep both looked at me and they said, when you go to the industry side, you're not going to snowboard more than 30 days a year. This is where you go to not snowboard. And I remember saying, I'll never turn into what you guys are. And I made sure that I said, I'll bet you I snowboard at least half the days I do on my last season in Steamboat. And I made sure I snowboarded 75 days that year. For trips, though, we were on a shoestring budget back then. I did some rep travel trips, going to see territories and meeting accounts.
Okay. So you're at work at Wave Rave one day. You get a phone call from Bob Gundrum, a.k.a. Gumby, and he pretty much starts a whole new journey for you. It's 13 months after you started with Wave Rave, and you're potentially going to go to N Boots, because I believe that was what everyone called him back then. But Gumby has to interview you first before he's going to give you a job. And to do that, you have to come to Seattle, you have to like Seattle, and get offered a job and accept it. And what is the interview process like there?
Well, he called me. He was talking to me for a while about, I thought he was talking to me about a potential sharing a rep together. And then he offered me a job at N-Boot. And N-Boot at Potter Tools, we were one of the first dealers that carried that in the country. I had worked with a European brand in the shop that we sold Rad Air, Radical Airlines. And one of the riders on there was a big part, or two of them, Danny Kiwi Meyer and Rada Lamb, were both part of Northwave. And when Gumby called me about that, I was pretty excited because in that time, Airwalk and Burton were the two boots that were flourishing, but N-Boot had the best fit out there. So if you could kind of get that goofy Euro look and kind of personality in line, we knew that there was a lot of potential, an opportunity with that boot. And when he called me to come in, I was excited about it. But he picked me up at the airport. He lived in Kurt and Courtney Cobain's cabin out in Carnation. And it was a 3-day interview. And the interview wasn't anything about the business. It was about if we could get along together, if we could travel. So we had a couple of beers that night, got up in the morning, we went to a Husky Huskers game, got absolutely annihilated, and ended up at one of his buddy's house chucking bombs off the back porch at 520. Like literal bombs that were built out of tennis balls and that shit. We were lighting them off and firing them. And I had a Nokia cell phone with that pull-up antenna. And I'm talking to my wife on the porch and she's like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, things are blowing up. She's like, what the hell is that? I'm like, these guys are firing bombs off at the highway. It's like, okay. And then the next day he drove me to the airport, but we stopped at the office real quick. And apparently we got along fine. And he was like, so what do you think? You want to move out here? That was basically my job offer.
So it was pretty much, hey, can we party together and get along together and spend a lot of time together? And once he figured that out, he's like, all right, this is my guy. Because he knew your qualifications in the industry.
My qualifications, again, were on a referral from him passing by someone he didn't want to talk to at a trade show. He was trying to figure something to say to keep this guy moving. And the guy was walking up and he's like, oh, hey, what's up, Marty? Hey, I'm looking for a sales manager. You know anyone? And he was like, I got someone for you. Call me on Wednesday. Johan Malkoski. Perfect dude.
So it's easy.
Yeah, pretty easy.
I mean, you have to work for it.
Yeah, luckily.
But things fell into place for you. You have to make the move to Seattle. Is there any reservations of coming up here and the weather up here?
No. I'd moved out of the mountains in Steamboat and moved down to Denver and Boulder at the time, and that's where I was working for Wave Rave, and the commute on I-70 to the mountains sucked.
Yeah.
It's miserable. Denver's not a ski town. Those corridor mountains were nothing like Steamboat, so I wasn't that excited about participating in that. And then moving out here, I always went to Ski Baker, heard about Stevens Pass through Matt Goodwill, and wanted to ride this stuff, so I was down.
What is your title at N Boots? Sales manager?
Sales manager, yeah. I ran Canada and U.S.
When you get there, is that when the rebrand to Northwave happens?
It wasn't a rebrand. Northwave was a sale brand that our Japanese distributor had registered over in Japan, and that's how the boots started. We were a factory in Italy that the Japanese came to them to build snowboard boots during that snowboard explosion. The Italians saw an opportunity because the boots were pretty good. They were an OEM manufacturer at that time. They had made liners for Burton. They had made boots for Morrow. They had made boots for other people at that time. So for them to own their own brand, that was an opportunity. So they registered the name Northwave in Europe. And then in US, it was still owned by Northwave Sales in Hood River. And so for us to sell the boots over here, we had to call it N-Boot. Down the road, we ended up buying the name from North Sales. We allowed them to use that, but we kept the name. We were allowed to use it in snowboarding. And that's when N-Boot went away.
Okay. Were you part of the acquisition of Drake and Bakota when that happened?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I would think that go into that from a management level when you bring those brands on, because it's a huge opportunity. But what do you guys have to think about internally?
Additional sales. It was adding on a complementary brand. So Drake was something I had heard about through one of my European buddies that was over there, that there was this brand out there that had these cool bindings, but the name, and they didn't have the distribution out there. And at that time, we were starting to fire with Northwave. We were really getting momentum. The boots fit incredible. We had a solid team, an unbelievable team, one of the best out there that George had put together. And with Drake looking at the bindings and what was out there, bindings were breaking all the time. The buckles were garbage. What we saw with this thing was an easy kind of tune-up and put it into the distribution that Northwave had. So when we first got it, I remember Gumby having a bet with the Italians of how many we would sell in North America in the first year. He's like, I bet you we sell over 15,000 pairs of bindings in our first year. And I remember after pre-books, we had a buying program that incentivized your Northwave order, typical leverage deal, to bring in Drake bindings in there. And we had maybe 9,000 bindings, 8,000 bindings sold. And Gumby told me to order 15,001. And at that time, Form was really the it brand, and George put these blue and yellow Drake F50 bindings on all the Forum team, and they were down at Hood that summer. And by December 1 of that year, we were completely sold out of bindings. We went from 15,000 first year to 30,000 the next year. I mean, the growth was insane.
That's incredible. And you attribute a lot of that to putting those bindings on those Forum boards and everyone seeing them?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's a smart move on you guys' part to make that happen.
It was marketing 101, put your product on the right people and get it seen.
Yeah. You're running 3 brands at this point. You go from a $3 million business to a $13 million business in 5 years, which is incredible. Money's coming in from everywhere, I would think. And from my experience, it seems like the sales guys, if anyone, are the guys that walk away with the big chunk of change. Not the sales manager, but the sales reps who have a commission, at least from what I saw in my day. Marketers, they have a ceiling, but not really for the sales guys. Are you personally crushing it?
I was doing better than I thought I would. I mean, I was by no means crushing it, but I had bought a house, or I had taken a loan and the bank had bought the house for me.
For sure.
I was paying them. Modest house that I'm still in. Was I crushing it? No. I had a fair paycheck. I was pretty happy with the bonuses I was getting based on a sales guy gets paid on what they sell. So I was pretty happy with it.
For your traditional sales rep, because that's where I feel like if you have a couple great lines, you can really make a killing.
You can.
There's a guy who's got GoPro. He's got the hot snowboard brand at the time, boot, binding, sunglass. I mean, those guys can make a couple $100,000, I would think, from just being a sales rep. And I would think that's one of the best jobs in the business if you have the right brands.
If you don't mind sitting in a car seat all day, if you don't mind answering the same questions all day, if you don't mind dealing with just riding along, or, hey, bro, can you hook me up? Or all the bullshit that goes along with being a sales rep. Sales rep's no cake job. And I get to travel with these guys, and I can only take 3 days at a time with these guys on the road because it's morning till night, doing these clinics, pretending to be enthusiastic about telling that same story. It's like a band singing the same song over and over and over. And that's the show that I got to sing, whoa, again, and just be stoked. And how many times have you sang that song? Sales rep job's brutal. And to manage all the lines, all the personalities within the companies, hats off to those guys. They deserve the money. If they go out and curate those accounts, then they deserve to get that cheddar.
And they're putting a lot of their own money back into it at the end of the day, too, in terms of their travel and everything that they're doing, samples, all of that. Eventually, as it always seems to happen when there's a parent company involved in a brand, the corporate vision might not align with your personal vision. Does work at Northwave turn into a job instead of just passion at some point?
No, we had an owner that was a factory guy. So when we started there, he would come in every morning, the owner of the company. It was his company. He would come in every morning, put his coat on a coat rack, and work the factory floor. And he had hired people to build a brand. He hired salespeople. He hired marketeers. He had hired people to run this brand for him. And he was enjoying the successes of this. He ended up wearing designer jeans and getting a cell phone and driving a Porsche and had some good money from his investment. But all of a sudden, he wanted to be part of these decisions that he really didn't have the qualifications to. And he started hiring consultants to help him make these decisions. And a consultant's job is to fix problems. And if there's no problems, then a consultant's out of job. So we ended up having a lot of problems that were going back and forth, and it just got to be not that fun. And we knew that we're probably going to be on our way out. So there was a group of us that had worked together, a couple of the Italians and 4 of us in the States, and we all had different roles within the company, but worked together extremely well. Like, I never wanted to do Gumby's job. I never wanted to do CFO's job. George didn't want to do my job. We all really felt comfortable and competent in our jobs with no training. Keep in mind, this business gives you no training.
There's no onboarding.
We're a series of linked recoveries is what I would call our business experience. And we decided that if we did this for someone else, that if we put our houses and money where our mouth was, that we should do it for ourselves. And that's when we decided to part ways with Northwave before we got asked to leave.
Okay. Who is the crew that goes and starts the new plan?
Martino and Giampaolo from Italy, who were the founders of Drake and the guys that started that up back there. And then they came on board and ran Northwave. GP ran Northwave Europe, and Martino was the product manager for both Boots and Binding. And then Gumby was the head of all of us. He was the president. Bruce was the guy that knew spreadsheets and financial guy. And then George was the marketeer, and then myself.
What do you start first?
We bought into Capita. So we had known Blue from trade shows and from Seattle, and he had started Capita in the year 2000. He was trying to shop the brand around. I think he shopped at K2 and maybe Atomic or something like that, but he needed some sales help. He needed some business sense. He was someone with a great idea and a lot of passion and very creative, but he didn't have the years on the road or the distribution knowledge, all the inside stuff, all the not fun stuff. He didn't have that. So we partnered up with him and invested into Capita. And then at the same time, we had started Cole Headwear.
So are you a part owner of Capita?
Mm-hmm. We kind of pulled our money and bought into that and then started Cole.
Union is after that.
Well, we were binding and boot guys, and we knew we were going to do that. And it took a while for people to get out of the old job. Bob was the first to go. George, we had a couple beers one day, and he just was tired of it, and he left on his own. But other people had severances and certain things that they were going to acquire for staying at a certain amount of time, which I exercised that right, and so did a few others because there was money on the line. So we left at different times before we were able to start, but we were kind of had this ball in motion, and it was moving.
And this is all around 2002 when all of this is...
2002 kind of happened by the time we're all out of... Northwave was 2004, so the official start of C3 is January 1, 2004, but things were in motion. People were working.
It's time for me to take my last sponsor break, and the brand I want to talk about is Spy Optic. They're a brand that I'm so happy to have involved with the show because not only do they have an incredible collection of sunglasses, but it's time to think winter, and Spy has been supporting all things snow since they started 25 years ago. Now, they have rad signature collections, game-changing technologies, and all their goggles have the Happy Lens, which really sets Spy apart from everyone else. And that's a big reason why you should be wearing Spy. The biggest reason to me that you should wear them is that Spy's goggles look better than everyone else's. I always think the other brands will catch up and fit and finish, but they don't. Spies look better and you will look better wearing them. For listening to the podcast, I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to get a pair of Spy sunglasses or goggles. All you need to do is head over to spyoptic.com, do your shopping, and when you check out, you'll get 20% off when you enter the code POWEL20, that's all one word with the number 20, and you're done. You're supporting the show, and you're going to look better than you ever have before. The Summit at Snoqualmie is back as a sponsor. They've been my go-to ski destination for the past 20 years, and it should be the logical choice for Seattle skiers and snowboarders. The terrain is awesome. East, West, and Central have something for everyone in the family, and Alpental is the choice for the hardcore rider or those wanting something more challenging. There's also tubing. But really, the beauty of the Summit is that it's 45 minutes away from Seattle, so no long car rides like when you go to other mountains, and you can always find parking. The time to buy a season pass at fall pricing has come and gone, unless you listen to the Powell movement. From today until November 30th, when you buy your pass over at summitatsnoqualmie.com, enter the code POWEL420, that's all one word with the number 420, and you will be extended fall pricing. So stoked to have the Summit at Snoqualmie back. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006, and they have a couple of new flavors that I'm going to tell you about. The first is Profuse Juice, a hazy IPA that kind of reminds me of Out of Office. It's got a great flavor and a percentage of sales benefit the Surfrider Foundation. The second beer, Smash, is a lighter wheat ale that I drank a ton of while I was in Bend. You can't go wrong with either of these beers, and they're great to drink outside. And 10 Barrel is all about drinking beer outside and supporting all things snow. You can find out a lot more about the company and the beer over at Fully Aligned. That's 10 Barrel's brand new podcast that lets you peek behind the curtain over at 10 Barrel. Next time you're at the store, buy some 10 Barrel and support the brand that really makes a difference in the sports we love, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Those are my sponsors. Now we are going to get back into the podcast. 2004, things start ramping up for your businesses, but 3 years in or 4 years into your business, we have this great recession. And while you guys have never been a company that's about scaling up and selling as much as you can every year, it's kind of been focused growth, I would think, over the years. What does the big recession do to such a young company?
Didn't do anything. We've grown every year that we've been in business, and it's because we practice responsible growth. We can only afford to grow so much. We're self-funded. We don't have a VC behind us or phantom investors. We can only afford to grow so much every year, and we took a position many years ago that we'd rather sell out than close out. So we weren't going to put any excess inventory on the market. We were going to responsibly produce every year and try to have our stuff be sold out by middle of January so that the next year when product hit the shelves that it was sought after and people knew that they could only get it in the early season.
So you didn't have to scale anything back in the business world, and there's definitely no scaling back at home, I would think, because you eventually have 2 kids at home, and one thing about you is that you're a super dad and a cool dad all rolled into one. I don't live in your house, so I don't really know this personally, but when I've seen the things that you do with your kids, like all the snowboard trips and all the rad shit you include them on, and you don't have to include them on any of it, that's where the super dad comes from. I get the cool dad part from maybe where you're the filmer encouraging your kids to jump off bridges and do shit like that. But I look at parenting as an experiment, and when you do all this shit, you think it's going to make your kids well-rounded kids, and what's your philosophy on raising your children?
It's a gamble. I mean, again, it's just like this business thing. There's no class to teach you how to do it. I think you end up doing stuff that's different than how your parents raised you. My dad was a coach and was active at every sporting thing I did, but he didn't participate. And parenting for me is I've been a participant in everything they've done. They snowboard, I snowboard. We biked race together. We rode mountain bikes together. I got to enjoy bringing them up and doing that. Now, is it the right way? Who knows? I mean, we're in the stage right now that I've got 2 roommates that live with me that don't pay rent. They don't really clean up after themselves, a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old. And we're in the challenging years right now that if there was some time travel, my wife and I would be having conversations with each other whether we're going to produce spawn or not. So good luck to all of you that are having kids right now and in this daydream that is just so awesome because it gets so challenging down the road. But the great years were absolutely incredible.
Did they realize that the time that you put in as a dad was not normal for most dads?
No, it was their normal, so it was just what we did. And, to be honest, a lot of people put that time in. I don't know that I did anything special. It was more selfish than anything to be a participant and keep me going. And in all honesty, them being part of snowboarding and then having a passion, being able to travel with them really has made me more relevant in snowboarding than I ever was than when I thought I was actually good at snowboarding, because I wasn't. First of all, I call myself a sportsman, not an athlete. Sportsmen drink and do things, and they're just better than the average Joe, and that's probably where I landed. I think my kids were a little better than that, and they were definitely better than sportsmen, and they exposed me to a world that I wouldn't be privy to on my own.
Well, they would have invited you to Super Park on your own, but once they saw your kids, they were like, hey, are you bringing your kids down to Super Park next year, kind of thing?
Yeah. Pat Bridges took a liking to Milo because he could do all varieties of hand plants, and Pat really goes towards that person. And they definitely benefited from my industry relationships or some of my relationships. But there's been some great people along the way that have invited us to events that maybe they shouldn't have been part of, but in the end, they proved that they deserved to be there, and we got invited again the next year.
That's amazing. Fast forward to 2014, you're out mountain biking with Milo, and you end up going over the bars and wreck yourself. You break your ribs, you're fucked, and is it just you and Milo?
Yeah, we were at Duthie Hill Bike Park. It was a Friday, and he had half day, and I was driving him to school, and he said, hey, man, why don't you grab the bikes? I got half day today. Let's go out jumping. Pick me up and take me out there. I was like, okay, cool. And off we went. There was a double line through the woods, and I was hitting stuff with him, but it takes me a little while longer to warm up, and he had me train him through it, follow him through, and ended up clipping the second set of jumps and went over the bars, and I could feel that hot flash of shock going on. I remember I was following with a GoPro, which I erased all of that because it was embarrassing on the size of the jump that I clipped, but I just had this sweat and hot flash, and he was trying to film this whole jump line through there, and he's like, hey, man, you all right? You all right? I was like, yeah. He goes, let me get you some water. Why don't you get back up and get down to the next jump and keep filming? All right, let me catch my breath. And we stayed out there for a while, but then drove back into Seattle and went to urgent care, and they said I had a broken rib, but something was going on, and sent me to the emergency room. And I went in there at 9, and at about 2 that morning, the doctor came in, and she's like, you don't have a broken rib. You have 4 broken ribs. You have a chipped scapula. You have an enlarged spleen, and you either have leukemia or myelofibrosis. And it was now Saturday morning. She goes, you're not going to die overnight, but you definitely need to see a hematologist on Monday. And that kind of started that whole segment of my life.
When you hear that and you have to wait through the weekend to go see a doctor, what are the thoughts going through your head? I mean, are you just getting on the internet and doing as much searching as you can to figure out what's going on? Or are you like, I'm going to die? Or are you like, fuck this, I'm going to fucking kill cancer? What are you thinking on your first couple days?
I didn't go into a place of pity by any means, but I think I was optimistic. We looked it up, and obviously everything on the internet tells you you're going to die in 2.5, 3 years. But I think we saw some glimmers of hope where there was people that were working with it, and we still didn't know what we had. So I had to go in and get a bone marrow aspirate, and that's where they drill into your hip bone, and they pull out basically a core sample, and then they tell you what it is. So I actually had to wait probably another 1.5 or 2 weeks before the diagnosis of myelofibrosis was there.
So you just know you have cancer, but you don't know what?
We don't know what it is, and really hadn't had cancer in my world at all up until that point. Like my grandfather died of it, but they were old.
Yeah.
It wasn't like some miserable thing that I had to go through with any friends. I really didn't know how to say I'm sorry, or I was thinking of you, or really didn't know the protocol.
It's a weird thing.
It's weird. It's definitely a weird thing.
I mean, I think, cancer or someone who paralyzed themselves, you just don't know what to say to that person because you're confused too, and you don't want to mess their head up.
Yeah, and the only thing I think that you can say is, I'm thinking of you. My thoughts are with you. What you can say is, I feel for you.
Yeah. So when you finally have their core sample done and they figure out what your disease actually is, is your wife in all these doctors' meetings with you, or is it you and the doctor?
My wife did pretty much everything. We were at the polyclinic at first. When she figured out what it was, she's like, we got to go to the place that they fix people, and that's Seattle Cancer Care. And so there was a Dr. Bart that she was trying to get me with because he specialized in myelofibrosis. And myelofibrosis is a blood cancer. Myelin is your bone marrow and fibrosis is fibrotic. So your bone marrow turns fibrotic or cement. And then you don't have the production of blood, so it moves to your spleen or your liver, and your liver, spleen gets enlarged, and then it all goes from there. So she found this doctor that worked alongside with this Dr. Bart, Dr. Pam Becker, who was also very clinically inclined, did a lot of research, and this is what they specialized in. And my wife got me in with Dr. Becker, and then we started the process. And the process is that I was at the beginning stages of this, that there was some symptoms that were starting to show up, but we didn't know what they were.
So they found it at the right time for you?
Yeah, I broke myself off at the right time, and then we could let this thing play out and play with drugs, or we could do a stem cell transplant, which is taking someone else's bone marrow and blood and a whole different system into you, and it could be cured, of course, with stuff that happens afterwards, but you could cure it. It was a curable cancer. And so we worked towards that road.
Do they give you odds? Do they say, hey, you've got a 30% chance of making it 10 years?
They give you a 70% chance of making it if you're a healthy individual. I like those odds.
70% is good.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one of my original bosses, he had a skin cancer and he had a 25% chance of making it. And one of my other bosses that we worked alongside, I remember him saying right to his face, he goes, just be on the 25% that does make it. Like, this is going to be easy to make this deal. And that always kind of stuck with me. Like, yeah, that's a great attitude. Just make sure you're on the 70% side. I like those odds. So I wanted to do it. I was healthy. I was in that like mid-40s, later 40s that I was in denial trying to keep up with my kids. So I was pretty healthy. I was eating right, drinking way less, gluten-free, all that bullshit. And I felt pretty fit and felt in shape that I could make that through. So I pushed for a transplant or moving towards that direction as soon as possible and not waiting for this thing to manifest into something I didn't want to be a part of.
And at this point at home, are you the one managing feelings? You're probably pretty scared. Everybody else is scared as well. But do you have to be like the patriarch of the house and pretend like there's no problem to make everybody comfortable?
We kept it pretty quiet. We kept it within a couple of close friends. I kept it with my partners. I told them because we kind of had to prepare. It was probably going to be a year out when this stuff went down. I didn't tell many friends, didn't tell any of the sales reps or people I worked with. I kind of kept it pretty close to home. And I think I managed those feelings the way any kid brought up in the 80s does, is you put those feelings and you bury them deep back in the closet. And if they come out, they do. If they don't, they don't. I probably cried in the car a couple of times by myself. But other than that, no. And that's not being a tough guy or anything. It's just the way I dealt with it. Not that it's right or not. I didn't go seek therapy over this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're in a waiting game. You have to find a donor.
We had to wait till the right time. And then it's pretty funny because I'm as white comes. And I remember my doctor saying, do you have any Asian in you? And I was like, your prescription all right, bro? And then he's like, what about any African American? I'm like, again, I'm pretty white. I'm like, why do you go to ask that? He goes, well, mixed races tend to have a harder time finding a donor. And if you're of European descent, that's where a lot of the donors come from. They do it on a match scale up to a 10 out of 10. And they found me a match out of Germany, a 10 out of 10 match that we could move forward with this thing. So I was pretty lucky of my Polish-Irish descent.
You found the guy, but before you can even have this transfusion or infusion, or I don't know what it is, your spleen's like the size of a medium pumpkin, and it's supposed to be the size of a lemon. Does that happen overnight, or is that something that happens?
Well, because the blood production went from the bones to the spleen, that's where it was producing everything. And my spleen went from what's normally 6 ounces, it was 12 pounds. So
holy
it was
shit.
Fucking massive. I thought I had rock hard abs, is what I thought I had. I'm like, fuck, I got a good build, but it was this massive spleen that went across my stomach. They had to remove that first because a transplant would be eaten up by the spleen. So they opened me up tip to tail from chest to underbelly button in mid-July and pulled that beast out and then stapled me up. And then I had 6 weeks to recover before I went in for intensive chemotherapy.
When you go in for chemotherapy, you're like the boy in the bubble, I feel like.
Yeah, they put you on the top floor there in the UW. Just they give you the best view. They give the people that are potentially going to die the best view.
That's very nice of them.
Yeah, that was really nice. But I went in there and in 6 days, they gave me a daily chemo that killed my red blood cells, white blood cells, my platelets, my immune system, everything. They basically zero you out. And then they let you rest for a day. And then they basically flew an igloo cooler over from Germany, stopped in New York, and then made it to Seattle. And so when you see those coolers walking through the airports, those are body parts. And that was my new stem cells, which was a bag from this donor. And then they infused me that night. And my infusion date is October 2nd, but it's actually October 3rd because they started at 8 at night and they finished at like 2 in the morning.
And when they do that, you're a different person. You're a part of a German dude once it takes. Right?
Yeah, I was B positive. My blood type was B positive, and now it's O negative. And basically what they said is I got to keep my skin and bones and your thoughts and all that stuff. But now my genetic makeup is that of my donor. So I'm allergic to scallops now, and I grew up scalloping with my grandfather and my father, and now I eat them, and I'll shit all night and puke all night. And then the other change is mosquitoes. Like, I look like a crackhead in the summertime because the mosquitoes just bite me and I swell up to unreal proportions. So it's only 2 bad things I've gotten out of the transplant so far is that. So I definitely got to spray on the DEET.
So you read about and you hear about how miserable and terrible chemotherapy is. And I'm sure I could watch an internet video that would show me, but I don't want to do that. You went through it. Like, what is it like when people say it's terrible? Are you vomiting uncontrollably? Do you just feel terrible? I mean, I don't know.
It's a mindfuck more than anything. I mean, you definitely feel the poison going in you, but, you know, I got like lightheaded and whatnot, but it was more of a emotional roller coaster more than anything because you knew it could be the beginning of the end. But we went into this whole thing with 100% faith in the medical system and in modern medicine. We weren't going down the Simpson oil, weed, CBD route that many people suggested would cure my cancer. And these are people with dreadlocks and sell weed on the side. And they were telling me that they could cure it with the home remedy they made. So we believed in the medical system.
I believe in the medical system.
I do too. Yeah.
And, you know, the people at the Hutch, because is this all part of Hutch?
Hutch is the research part of it. Seattle Cancer Care is where I got the diagnosis and all the treatment lined up, and then it was all performed at University of Washington. And transplants were invented here in Seattle by a German guy in the 60s. They were invented, so couldn't have been a better place to have this procedure.
For immunotherapy and all different types of therapy, that's the best place in the world to be, and you happen to be here. What are the next few months like for you after that? Is there any hiccups from the transfusion? Is life back to normal, or how does it work out?
It's a transplant. Transfusion's something different, and I had many of those after. I spent 29 days in the hospital. I was on every drug possible in there. I had feeding tube in there. You know, there was 7 days I couldn't eat. There was a week where from my mouth to my asshole just completely ripped apart from a drug called methotrexate, and they gave that to me 4 times. And so I remember my birthday 4 years ago right now. I had no lips. My lips had fallen off in the middle of the night because it just eats away at you.
You had no lips?
Yeah, like I woke up with my lip flapping in my mouth at night and I was choking on it and had to rip it off because it just sheds all of your GI tract. And I had like that spit suction from the dentist. I couldn't swallow. So that was going on. But I was in there for 29 days. I kind of went through these short stints of misery. And the way we went through is we just compartmentalized it. We asked a lot of questions of like, what's coming up? What's going to happen? He's like, well, this next week's going to be miserable. But keep in mind that it's only going to last 6 or 7 days. So you kind of keep your eye on the ball that, all right, day 1 is miserable. Day 2 is miserable. But I'm getting closer to day 7 when it's going to get all better again. And the hospital, they build it up that that's the hard part. And the hard part comes when they release you from the hospital. Because in the hospital for 21 hours a day, they're taking care of you. You got nurses all over you. They're feeding you oxy. I had morphine. I had unlimited dipper on the morphine. I think one day on my birthday, you could hit it every 6 minutes. I spent a day of just being out of my mind on morphine just because you could and it was legal. So you're on every drug in there. And then you get out and like you said, boy in the bubble, you're in this danger zone. Danger zone of 100 days with a transplant. And that's where you can go septic. Something can fail on you. You can die. You can bleed out something. Everything's trying to regrow in you. And so after they release you, you've got another 65, 70 days that you had to go back to the hospital every day for blood work, every day for either a red blood cell transfusion or a platelet transfusion. And I had 50-something transfusions over those 65 days.
Whoa.
You're in the hospital from anywhere from 3 hours to 9 hours. So it was a full-time job. That was really the hardest part because you think you're getting out of the hospital and you've got your life back. You're in doctor's time. You're in nurse's time. You don't own your life anymore. And then you go home and you think you have a little more control over yourself, and you have even less because now you've got to go back and forth in and out of Seattle Cancer Care. You've got to get your transfusions. You're on their timeline. And that's something my wife had to manage. She had to manage all of that. That was a full-time job for her.
I'm sure your partners are all making sure that you're taken care of in the time of need. I mean, you guys are all good buddies as well, I would think.
Yeah, it's still business, and my partners, you couldn't ask for a better group. That was one concern that I didn't have to have. My friend and partner Bruce said, he's like, hey, as far as I'm concerned, you're a traveling salesman, and you're just going to be gone for a while. But you're still working, and we've got you covered. And we'd ramped up our insurance, and 29 days in the hospital was $500,000. And then my next 3 months out of there was probably another $500,000, $1 million man in 4 months by the time it was all done.
Insurance take care of like 90% of that?
Insurance was good to us, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, there was still a good amount of out-of-pocket costs.
You're alive, though.
Still driving a used truck.
Yeah, but you're alive.
Yeah. You got another shot at it.
Yeah. Do you have to take a lot of meds to this day?
These days, I'm down to 3 meds, and I only have to take 2. I have to take a penicillin for the rest of my life because my spleen's gone.
Okay.
And so that's that, and then I take a liver protector. And then some of the chemo gave me like neuropathy in the feet, and I can take something for that, but I'm starting to get off that. At one point, I was like 30-something pills a day, and now I'm down to, I take my pills in the morning, I'm done.
Nice. You just had your 4-year checkup.
4-year birthday, yeah.
So the 5 years, like the huge one where people have a party, right?
I don't know if that's for transplant people.
Okay.
That's for people that can go in remission and that stuff, and I'm not saying I can't go in remission, but that's really not part of like...
It's totally different.
I think it's a different thing. You have a higher risk of getting a secondary cancer once you've gone through cancer because they destroy your body with chemo and all the other drugs they pump you through. But I don't think I have like breast cancer or one of these other type of cancer things we're in remission and we're making it through and that thing. I think I'm on the other side.
That's how uneducated I am about it.
You got to stay away from being a Google doctor because, again, you die.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel good with where I'm at and where I'm going. And a friend of mine who you interviewed from Whoa, he had a buddy that had the same exact diagnosis as I did. And he was my age, and he only made it 60 days. He had transplant 60 days after he was done.
Wow.
And we were real similar circumstances, except for maybe the place where we got it done, and I think our attitude.
Huh.
So kind of sobering right there.
Yeah. Does it change the way that you look at life now? Well, I've seen you do a whole bunch of different things for cancer research. You probably weren't doing that stuff before you had cancer. How have you become a different person based on this disease?
I'm more aware of it and more sympathetic of cancer, and I know how to react to people based on how people handled how I had it. So I know that. Did I have any epiphany or something or life-changing event? Absolutely not. I think I'm still pretty much the same person, except for the fact that I don't have to be right all the time. Like, I don't care anymore. Shit doesn't matter to me as much as it once did. If someone's really fighting to be right and I know that they're wrong, I'm like, okay, die by your own sword. I don't give a shit. Like, I'm not going to fight for this one. Let it go. So I'm a little more easier on that end, I guess, a little more West Coast.
You a little nicer now?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure. Yeah. More tolerant.
Back in your younger days, the Masshole would come out. It still comes out, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But people didn't know how to take it, and they didn't realize your personality, and they were just like, that guy might be a jerk. But that was never the case. That's how you grew up. And then you get West Coasted. You change a little bit. Then you get cancer, change even more. And now you're a nice, happy person.
As my friends back east would say, you turn into a pussy.
Okay.
Welcome to your new life.
We call that a nice, happy person out here in the West Coast.
Yeah, I call it a nice, happy person.
So we've been going for a long time. I was going to talk more about the business, but you know what? We talked about the business in the beginning of the podcast. I think at this point, it is time for us to jump into some inappropriate questions. Now, you had connected me with Fletcher from Pennywise, and I had been trying to get Fletcher to ask you inappropriate questions for the past month and a half. Mm-hmm. But Fletcher's a very busy dude.
He's a busy dude.
He's a busy dude. He's a rock star. We're not rock stars. So I came up with a plan B. All of these are off the record, or not off the record. No one's going on the record asking you these questions. But I have 3 inappropriate questions for you. They should all be pretty good. The first one, 20 years ago, you were in Las Vegas for a trade show. You had some lap dances that are still talked about to this day.
That is a dude. Can
you tell me about that night?
We were with the Italians and some of the team riders, and there was a dancer. I don't know. She was throwing out lappies or whatever, and maybe I got one, maybe not. I don't spend money on that stuff. That's not me. But someone might have bought me a lap dance, and she was dancing, and I remember the Euro, and it was just screaming, that is a dude, because it looked like a dude. Not really that good of a story.
Question number 2 is going to be a 2-part question about number 2. Was there a time when your buddies dropped you off on your porch covered in who knows what for your wife to find you, take you upstairs, and sponge bath you?
No, that's a fabricated story right there.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. She found me one time in Steamboat. I had passed out on the toilet taking a dump, and we knew it was true love when she put my head between her legs and cleaned me up and put me into bed. She gave me a little wipe and then put me to bed, and we knew that she was the one there, but it wasn't landing on there and shit.
Okay, so I'm getting some
bad information, bad intel.
But I'm going to go with my second part of this number 2 inappropriate question. Do you remember being at SIA when you happened to sleepwalk outside of your room, you got locked out of your room, and you ended up in the lobby in your tighty-whities?
That wasn't SIA. That was the Gore-Tex trip with Wave Rave. That was my first business trip. And I was sharing a room with Dave Sipanowski. And the SnowCon guys brought weed cookies to this get-together.
That's early weed cookies.
Early weed cookies. And I'd never tried them before, and I tried them and had no clue where I was. And I woke up. I guess I was face down and I crapped myself in bed. And I got up and went outside the room for some reason. And the door locked and I was in tighty-whities with a pile of poo in there. And I went to the front desk and had to get a key and then let myself back in. And then I, tried to flush the underwear and stuff down the toilet, and that overflowed. And it was just a hot mess. It was very regrettable. That's why I was late today, too. The toilet overflowed at work.
Really? Do you?
No, I don't know what happened, but I had to go get a plunger, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I had texted you. I'm like, I'll be there at 10:06. And all of a sudden, this thing starts bubbling up after me. And I'm like, fuck, where's the plunger? And I run out in the office. I'm like, anyone know where there's a plunger? And the whole office just kind of looks at me like, hey, happy birthday.
I learned a new term with this question. Is it true that you are known for growing tub shrimp on road trips?
Growing? No, you throw tub shrimp.
I'd never even heard of tub shrimp. What is a tub shrimp? Your kids are old enough to hear.
Yeah, it's a bathroom beat, but you leave it in the tub, and the next person grows in there, and they got like either web feet or it looks like shrimp down the bottom. So, they don't properly go down. You scratch the itch.
That is discussing an amazing term.
Few and far between. I think that was something that was probably learned in the shower stalls at Salem State, that you would go in following someone come out and have web feet. And you're like, fuck, really, bro? You got to wash that shit down.
That's so disgusting.
Can't leave evidence of the crime in there.
You really can't. I mean, who does that? Leaves it on the floor. But I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, that is our podcast. I want to thank you for coming out. I'm glad you're alive, man.
Well, I'm glad I'm alive. I've enjoyed my time with you at those Cancer Care events. We've had some interesting laughs, especially over 8 times in squirting.
There is a competitor that we see at one of these bank slaloms. Johan stands at the start gate and he gets everyone fired up to get on course. And he's making sure their goggles are set and everything's clear. And we have one woman who came up and...
We were asking the questions of what'd you do last night? Everyone was coming up, I got hammered, or I slept early, I waxed my skis, I did this, that, and the other thing. And average young lady rolls up and Mike says, what'd you do last night? And she said, I got myself off 8 times and squirted all over the bed. Yeah. And we looked at each other with the jaws that just hit the snow, and off she went. And you sent her down the road. I remember the lady that was working with us that was a mom of 2, and she was like probably 2 years older than me. The chick goes off and runs the course, and you hear her mumbling behind us. Like, we're looking at each other, and we hear her mumbling behind us. She's like, 8 times? Just jealous of the whole thing. And we're like, whoa. Interesting event, but it was for a good cause.
That was one of the most amazing one-liners I've ever heard. It kind of left me speechless, left you speechless, and that's hard to do for both of us. So, Johan, I want to thank you for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
I will.
So that was time with Johan Malkoski, and what a scary story. I mean, fuck cancer. Yeah, you hear that all the time, but it's so true. It's like 1 minute Johan was in complete agony at the bike park with his kid, and then a day later he realizes the pain is not the worst of his problems. But Johan powered through, loose lips and all. The craziest part of all of this to me is that when Johan took the German dude's system, he received all the German dude's allergies. That's so crazy, as I'd not even thought of something like that. And while I didn't know him pre-cancer, Johan is one of those dudes that everyone speaks highly of. Just an all-around good guy who tells it like it is and means well. And a guy who no longer has cancer. I can't even imagine what I would think if this were ever to happen to me. It's one of those things that a lot of people will experience in life, unfortunately. And right now, one of our own, former pro skier and Squaw Valley legend Rob Gaffney, is currently getting a new system. And from what I've read, his cancer sounds very much like Johan's, but it could be totally different. I'm no doctor. What I learned from Johan is that when someone has a cancer like this, reach out and tell them that you're thinking about them. So I challenge each one of you to seek out Rob Gaffney online, donate to his GoFundMe, or just send him a message letting him know that you're thinking about him and wishing him the best. What sucks is that I haven't done this, but will be doing so today. Man, cancer is such a shitty thing, but it's part of life and something that will affect all of us in one way or another, and the only thing we can really do is trust modern medicine and come to the table with a positive attitude. That's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on, and tell a friend about the show or just post about it on your social channels. Last but not least, I want to thank my amazing sponsors. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, The Summit at Snoqualmie, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.